Hey guys, Mike Barry here with our new product, Sonore. It's fresh off the press. We've spent about the last 3 or 4 weeks tweaking it, and I've really enjoyed myself working with this library. It's very capable of doing melodies with a huge amount of tone. It doesn't ever trespass into that ugly, brassy, quadruple, triple forte that seems to be very prevalent in a lot of sample libraries today. And sometimes that, to my ears, it can make it sound very pinched and almost synthetic. There's so much activity in the overtones that it sounds like it's going through a processor when it isn't. So for this library, we wanted to very much concentrate on getting that thick, warm body of sound. And we chose microphones and chose players and policed the sessions in order to best get that. And I think the end result is really good. The point of this video is to really be in lieu of a manual if you don't want to read the manual. I'm going to go through all the heavy stuff that you need to know. A lot of these things I've learned myself or I've stole from better mock-up artists than me, either watching them live or talking with them or kind of picking apart their orchestration when I'm doing orchestration. So give me a few minutes of your time and I'm going to go through the stuff that I think you need to know to make the library shine and sound realistic. Modern French horns never play with vibrato, but trumpets do. With an ensemble of orchestral trumpets, only the principal will vibrate when needed. So the first vibrates on expressive or meaningful passages, while the second, third, and fourth players stay non-vibrato. And that's the formula for modern trumpet 2D orchestral playing. We've actually recorded the library in a manner that this recipe is possible to recreate. To access trumpet 1 solo vibrato, use CC2. CC2 down all the way is non-vibrato, and up all the way is full vibrato, and in between it scales. Just as live trumpet players do, use non-vibrato for most passages, so when you do use vibrato, it is contrasting and actually means something. Consider using vibrato for longer notes, climaxes of phrases, and important melodic notes. Usually, our first microphone perspective is the best for the majority of applications, but it's not always perfect for all situations. If you were working on a track with many different sample libraries, and you found that you needed a more ambient and distant sound from Sonore, it's totally fine to switch over to the room and surround mics. The top 1% of sample composers are always changing their microphone perspectives to get a more believable blend. Although in the past we've asked for this functionality, at this very moment, Kontakt 5 is not self-aware as to how loud an individual sample is at any moment. Therefore, it is impossible to create an algorithm that seamlessly and automatically partners release and legato samples to their sustain sample. What that means in English is, despite our best efforts, at this time we cannot perfectly match a release sample to its sustain sample in Kontakt at any one point. Instead, we have to approximate what is best for the entirety of the sustain sample. Over the years, we've become quite good at doing this, but in the event you run into a rogue release sample, don't despair, as it's fixable. Simply use the release volume fader to ride the rogue release sample back into place. And of course, be sure to set it back to its default value after you've finished. In this example, I've had our programmer Ben purposely set a release sample to be too quiet so I can fix it for demonstration purposes. If you run into a legato transition sample, which is either too loud or too quiet, you can correct it in similar fashion by using this legato volume knob. So if you hear an unnatural boost or dip at the very moment a legato note changes, correct it with this fader, and of course be sure to set it back to its default for the next note. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with legato speed knob. If you wish to have the legato transition speak for a shorter or longer amount of time, use this knob. Power users are always riding this knob to get realistic sounding playing. It really shouldn't be left static. Lastly is this Reverb comp fader. If you hear too much or too little of the previous note ringing in the hall, but the legato itself sounds correct, you can use this fader to correct this. And of course, be sure to reset it to its default value when you're done. Being overly simple for a moment, horns and trumpets have two basic methods of producing sequential notes. They can use their valve only to change a note, or they can use their valve plus a tongue at the moment the note changes. When they use their valve only, there is no break in the sound. When they place a tongue, there is a minuscule stopping of the sound before the new note strikes. Regardless of the technique employed, classical players are taught to put their valve down quickly to avoid any half-valving, which can sound jazzy. In the sequencer, to get the valve-only sound, simply load the legato patch. Be sure the overlay fader is at 0 and play in a connected fashion or with the pedal. This is typical sample legato. All composers are used to dealing with this. If you want that second kind of legato, which is useful for fast playing, you have to tell Kontakt that you want it or you'll always only get the first type. To actually get realistic sounding tongued playing, I found the best way to do this is surprisingly to still use the legato transitions, but this time to include an overlay. Since in real life the trumpet will still be ringing with the old note when the new note sounds, in the sequencer having the legato samples play best approximates this forward motion. This library has all the overlays lined up, tuned, and in place to use in this fashion. Use keyboard velocity to control the power over the overlay. And for further control, use the overlay volume fader in conjunction with velocity. Note that if this fader is all the way down, you will hear no overlay. You can choose your overlay by striking one of the green key switches while in legato mode. Make sure this latching button is engaged if you want to set and forget it. If the button is not engaged, you will need to hold your finger down for each note and then let it up when you don't want it anymore. For trumpets, we recommend using the first overlay, secco, and for horns there is only one choice. If for the trumpets you wanted a forte piano or a bell tone, you can choose the other two overlays. Let's listen to a phrase using just plain legato, and then an identical phrase where I've employed overlays in the fashion I just described. See this reverb right here? We suggest always keeping this on and keeping at the default setting. Why? Because we use this reverb partly in our legato engine. If you have this reverb set to off, the verb comp fader just described in the previous section won't work. So keep this on, and if you desire to give the patch some more glossiness or sheen, use the send in your DAW. Remember, there is no reason to ever subject a product recorded at MGM scoring stage to a convolution verb. For this space is already an endgame sound, and it doesn't need to be improved or modified. Consider using a gain plugin to give yourself some extra wiggle room while entering MIDI performances. For example, if you find yourself getting constantly too loud in the high end of the fader on CC7, you might want to set your gain plugin to be -3 dB to give you some more room. If you're working on an exclusively quiet passage, you might want to set the gain plugin to +2 or +4 dB to help you dial in that mezzo dynamic. Remember that the sweet zone of this library is going to be around mod wheel equals 100 value. Try and live in that zone for forte melodies, and dip only above or below while contouring or at the end of lines or crescendos. Lastly, a lot of what sounds right to you might sound wrong to somebody else, and vice versa. So a lot of this is subjective. Some people really prefer hearing overglorified portamento transitions, and some people like plainer, more invisible, realistic sounding transitions. Some people prefer a heavy overlay, and some prefer a lighter overlay. What I'm trying to tell you is compose in the manner that best suits you. Remember, if it sounds good, it is good. Lastly, here is the list of active MIDI controllers employed in this library. Any CC with an asterisk is user changeable.